Let's talk about what happened before this monstrous disaster. First of all, the researchers and geologists that were in Japan at that time that were studying earthquakes began to realize the pattern. They thought might be able to predict when these enormous disasters might strike, or at least learn a rough estimate when they would come. Strangely, after all the work they had put into research, the officials responsible for the country's hazard and emergency assessments didn't really pay attention to their warnings. But what caused the enormous earth shattering event wasn't just basic plate tectonics like many other earthquakes. When the Japanese geologists were conducting their research on the region, they noticed patterns, and they thought if those patterns persisted for so long, that it would be safe to assume they would continue. According to an article from LiveScience.com, quote, Japan's scientists had forecast a smaller earthquake would strike the northern region of Honshu, end quote. So they had forecast some kind of earthquake, and that forecast was a little off. However, they didn't really realize traces of a devastating event, also a tsunami earthquake, that occurred in the northern region a few centuries before the 2011 Tohoku earthquake would strike. Since it was so long ago, that's why the officials ignored it. Other forecasts for this earthquake include a magnitude 7.3 foreshock that happened 2 days before the actual 9.0 quake. So geologists thought that it was the main event because 7.3 is pretty devastating and much large, or very large, but obviously that proved to be incorrect because the much larger 9.0 quake happened later. So after the devastation, geologists are cracking down on this research and they're really monitoring the areas and plates that were involved in the case of this mega quake. So what exactly caused this mega disaster? Those of you that have taken geology probably know how an earthquake is started, but for those that don't know, there's something called a subduction zone. That is when one of Earth's tectonic plates submerges underneath another tectonic plate. They go into the mantle and beneath the crust. There are a lot of many there are a lot of major plate there are a lot of many major plates in this planet, but we mostly study the seven major and there are a lot of minor ones. In the case of the Tohoku, Japan earthquake, the two plates that collided beneath the Japan Trench were the Pacific Ocean plate and then the continental plate that the Asian continent sits on. So the Japan Trench is basically an enormous subduction zone. According to an article from LiveScience.com, quote, the Tohoku quake lifted the seafloor by over 30 feet over an area the size of Connecticut, unquote. After years of built up stress, the tension is finally released and caused this devastation. When this happened, Life Science says that the two plates of Earth's crust slid past each other up to 260 feet. But how did these really large chunks of rock move so far? Well, research was conducted and scientists found out that there was a very thin, slippery layer of clay lining the fault, and that helped the plates be able to move along one another. The plates not only moved horizontally, but as stated earlier, they also moved vertically 30 feet, and that is why the tsunami following the quake was so large and so devastating. The catastrophe was very scary, making hundreds of thousands of people refugees and almost killing 16,000 people. But but obviously, a lot of people survived this event as well. But how did they do it? I'll let the suspense build up, and we'll get to that later. Even after the largest wave hit, a whopping 9.0, there were still thousands of aftershocks tormenting the region. But the most infamous would be the tsunami that had struck soon after the initial event. So after this first major shock, right after that, the tsunami had started building up. LiveScience.com says less than an hour after the earthquake, the first of many tsunami waves hit Japan's coastline. So this portion of the environmental emergency was staggering. The waves reached up to colossal heights of almost 130 feet and devastated everything in its path up to 6 miles inland, all the way to a city called Sendai. Even the tsunami seawalls that are built to hold against any like devastating waves that come ashore, they couldn't hold against the raging storm of this tsunami. They were destroyed, and the tsunami was able to flow freely. Research shows that the tsunami flooded an estimated area of approximately 217 square miles in Japan, and the tsunami was also one of the largest in history. Same with the earthquake that caused it. According to Britannica Encyclopedia, The tsunami raced outward from the epicenter at speeds that approached almost 500 miles an hour. That's pretty fast. And those same waves stretch all the way across the pond and reach Hawaii, and still being those waves that hit Hawaii were still 12 feet high. Even the Aleutian Islands and Alaska were affected by some 5-foot waves, and then there were some larger 9-foot waves that struck the western coast of North America, like California and that. For goodness sake, even Antarctica was affected by waves 1 feet tall. It's pretty tiny, but those did knock off ice chunks of the Antarctic continent. Based on the size of waves that struck Japan, it makes sense that the tsunami caused many more deaths than the large quake that happened before it. Believe it or not, some people were actually prepared for an event like this. Maybe not perfectly or 100% prepared, but that's better than not being ready at all. Both the individuals of society were prepared along with the government, but the government likely could have been more ready had they listened to the warnings that were given to them. Some people don't thank the government because they didn't get much help from them. They also received a lot of help from other victims in the same state that they were in. An article from Seth Browner provides an example. Quote, Ayumi Okuda escaped to her friend's house just as the ground floor was flooding, and Rikiya Aoto spent a short period of time looking for an elderly person who he did not see evacuate before he fled to higher ground himself. Unquote. It is amazing that in a time like this, some people will still put others before themselves. And then, aside from people being selfless and kind, victims were also smart and proactive. They used generators for power, and they were able to cook rice instead of the normal way they cooked rice. And people were also assigned to scavenge around and find other things like miso and shrimp for the rice, so they were getting more nutrients than just rice. People that made it out of their homes alive also took refuge in public locations like schools and shopping centers. Obviously, the ones that were not flooded by the tsunami. Okay, so there were also a lot of events that happened after the earthquake and the tsunami, and those events also had pretty large effects on Japan, even the surrounding world. So some things that occurred that's almost as terrifying as the disaster itself was a pretty big nuclear meltdown in the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. And also in the wake of this disaster, there was thousands and thousands of refugees. And then this disaster also started a pretty big economic problem. So just a couple of days after the initial disaster, Japan declared a state of nuclear emergency in March 11th in the year of 2011. So this was a pretty big deal. Anybody that was within 12 miles of the Fukushima Daiichi power plant, they had to be evacuated. So that included 140,000 people in the area. In this case, in this nuclear meltdown, the reactors shut down automatically when they were in danger, I guess, but they didn't cool down properly. So as a result of that, there were three kind of like meltdowns, or three meltdowns total, and some of these meltdowns were like hydrogen air chemical explosions, and then there was also radioactive materials that were released. This was the largest nuclear meltdown since Chernobyl incident in 1986. So something key that keeps people alive after or during an event is people that help them or how people respond. And this was very key to people surviving. So response was a big deal. According to Professor Asaho Mizushima from the Waseda University Faculty of Law, quote, on the evening of the earthquake, Defense Minister Kitazawa ordered the dispatch of 50,000 members of the Japanese Self-Defense Force to aid in the relief work for the Great East Japan earthquake. End quote. Just a couple days later, that was doubled, reaching 100,000 members. And also the SDF weren't like the only people to reply. There were forces from other departments in Japan, including the fire department, the police, as well as the Japan Coast Guard. And it wasn't just locally, but all over the country of Japan. Even the United States helped by deploying a nuclear-powered aircraft. This helped by deploying a nuclear-powered aircraft, 19 naval vessels with 18,000 people and 140 aircrafts. This operation, they called it Operation Tomodachi, and the word Tomodachi means friends. According to Mizushima in his article, Quote, Operation Tomodachi was utilized with the aim of increasing military cooperation between Japan and the United States, end quote. So we did this, I guess, to help them, but also to like kind of not exactly bribe them, but so it's like, oh, we're going to help you. So in case we need help in the future, you guys are going to help us. All right. Today, I discussed what happened before the events of Tohoku, Japan, what was going on during, as well as what happened after and how people responded. I hope I was able to teach you as much as I learned. Thank you. And there's my reference page. Let's see if we can get this program to work now. And we did. Awesome. Bye.